He descended to the realm of the dead, rose on the third day, ascended into heaven, and is seated at the right hand of the Father. Ancient words whispered across centuries, but hiding a truth few dare to face. A fragment of the creed that holds a moment never forgotten in heaven's memory. Now picture this: Christ wrapped in fire and shadow, his eyes like living flame, descending into the land of the dead. Chains blaze in his hands, not as prisoner, but as king. Souls rise, darkness trembles. Why did Jesus step into the depths? Why did he preach in hell? Welcome to Bible Stories and Mysteries. Here, forgotten truths of faith awaken new light. And Christ's descent? It was not defeat. It was the silent thunder of eternal victory. What if the truths the church still proclaims, but the world no longer hears, are the very keys your soul needs today? What if hell was already broken before you were born? If your spirit longs for what the world has forgotten, subscribe and walk this mystery with us. Stay until the end. There's a key hidden here for your battle, your silence, your redemption. He descended to the realm of the dead, rose on the third day, ascended into heaven. The words roll from our tongues like liturgy carved in stone, a creed whispered in cathedrals and whispered again in hospital rooms. We say them, sometimes without trembling, forgetting what they hold. But hidden in that line, so often passed over, is a scene that shook eternity. Not metaphor, not symbol, a descent, a step into the silence that no man dared to enter before. For centuries, this line remained in the shadows. He descended into hell, not just poetry, a proclamation. A door creaks open in the dark, and down goes the light. Have you ever paused there, in that line? What happened in the hours between the final breath and the morning light of resurrection? While the earth grieved and the tomb lay sealed, something unspeakable happened in the depths. Imagine eternity leaning forward, angels holding their breath, the Son of God, lifeless in the body, but alive in spirit, entering the realm of the forgotten, not in weakness, not in retreat, but with eyes that glowed like fire and steps that echoed across the underworld. He came to preach, but not like before, not in parables or mountaintops. This was no sermon on a hill. This was thunder in a cavern. The early church never saw this as myth. They trembled at it. They painted it. They sang it in hymns older than our oldest manuscripts, because it wasn't a side note. It was a revelation that Christ would go where no one else could, not to be caged, but to open cages. And this changes everything, because if Christ walked through the gates of the grave, not to be conquered but to conquer, then no darkness is too deep, no soul too buried, no silence too final. He has gone before you, even into death, even into hell. And what he did there was not silence, it was proclamation. He did not enter as a prisoner, but as a king with fire in his steps. He walked into the land of the dead, not to plead, but to proclaim, not to weep, but to wake. Hell did not swallow him, he stormed it. The gates did not resist, he shattered them. This was no humble visitor stepping quietly through the shadows. This was the sovereign, the Lord of glory, descending into enemy ground with authority that no darkness could deny. The church fathers called it the harrowing of hell, but the word harrowing in ancient tongues meant something fierce, like the plowing of iron through frozen earth. He harrowed hell, tore through it, the chains burned at his touch, the silence broke like glass, and the souls, those righteous ones who had waited in the valley of shadow, heard the sound of deliverance. This was not a second sacrifice. It was the first victory. It was the moment the promise made in Eden was fulfilled in fire. The serpent's head crushed not only at Calvary, but in the depths below, where death had held the keys. But the keys did not belong there. They were stolen, and Christ had come to take them back. The prophets had seen it dimly. Isaiah spoke of captives being freed. David sang, "You will not abandon my soul to Sheol." But no one imagined it would look like this. the Son of God descending, radiant and untouchable, to stand in the place of ancient despair and proclaim, "It is finished." The icons of the East show him standing on broken gates, lifting Adam and Eve by the wrists, because salvation was not achieved by effort, but by mercy. The gesture is clear. The dead do not rise on their own. They are raised, and he alone has that power. Have you ever imagined this moment? The shock of light in centuries of darkness, the sound of eternity thundering through silence. What looked like defeat on earth was invasion in the underworld. He did not descend to suffer again. He descended to reign, hell, but not the one we imagine. When we say he descended into hell, we picture flames, devils, torment without end. But that's not the place Christ entered. The church has always made a distinction. He did not descend into the hell of the damned, but into Sheol, the realm of the dead, the waiting place of souls. The Hebrews knew it. The Greeks hinted at it. A place of silence, not punishment. Shadow, not fire. A place where even the just were held, because the gates of heaven had not yet opened. Abraham was there, Moses, Ruth, David, Isaiah, Jeremiah. They were not forgotten, but they were bound. Not by chains of sin, but by the weight of waiting. They longed for the promise they had only glimpsed. They died in faith, but not yet fulfilled. The light had not yet come. And so they waited, in a darkness thick with memory. The Catechism says, Jesus did not descend to deliver the damned, nor to destroy hell, but to free the just who had gone before him. A rescue, not a raid. A liberation, not a battle. He went where the righteous had been held captive, not as victims of wrath, but as children of hope. This place, this Sheol, was not the inferno. It was the dusk between two eternities, the night before the morning of redemption. And when Christ arrived, he did not enter with fear, but with light in his hands. He walked into that gray silence with the fire of glory and turned shadows into songs. And hell, this Sheol, was never the same. Imagine David, who sang of the valley of the shadow of death, now standing in it and watching the shepherd arrive. Imagine Moses, who never entered the promised land, now beholding the Lamb who leads into eternity. Their wait was over. This was not metaphor, it was moment, a divine hour hidden beneath the earth, where promises were kept and souls were lifted. He did not come to explain death, he came to end it. He preached, but not with words. In the first letter of Peter, a single verse opens a thunderclap in theology. He went and preached to the spirits in prison. 1 Peter 3:19, no parables, no Sermon on a Mount. This was the Word himself, descending into the silence of the grave, proclaiming not ideas but fulfillment. The voice that had stilled storms now entered a place no echo had ever reached, and it was heard. But what did he say? The church has long taught. He didn't need words. His presence was the proclamation, his radiance the message. The very fact that God entered that realm was the sermon. The gospel had come not just to the living, but to the dead. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote that Christ's soul, united with his divinity, illumined the depths like the sun tearing through midnight. The imprisoned spirits, those who had died in hope, were not just visited, they were vindicated. For generations they had waited in shadow. Now they stood in the presence of the light that had once spoken the universe into being. Can you imagine it? The forgotten ones, their ears filled only with the silence of centuries, suddenly hearing movement, then light, then the impossible sound of glory drawing near. This was not doctrine, it was deliverance. And still, we ask, why preach? Why not simply unlock the gates and leave? Because what Christ came to announce was not only freedom, but victory. He didn't just break the doors, he named himself as King. He declared the reign of grace even in the lowest place. Some believe this preaching was a cosmic declaration, a proclamation over all creation that sin had lost its grip and death its sting. Others see it as the beginning of resurrection, not just for Christ, but for the world. But one thing is clear, the tomb did not hold him, neither did the underworld. And when he spoke, he was not asking, he was commanding. He came to preach to the forgotten, so that no soul would ever again be without hope. The earth was silent, but heaven held its breath. Holy Saturday, a day that feels like nothing. The cross stands empty, the tomb is sealed, the city sleeps. For many, it is the forgotten day. But in the silence, a storm was moving, not on the surface but in the depths. While the world mourned and the disciples hid, Christ was not still. He had descended into a realm untouched by light until now. Imagine the stillness of the earth. The Messiah's body lies cold in stone, wrapped in linen, watched by guards. But below that tomb, beyond the reach of men, eternity was unfolding. The descent was not delay, it was confrontation, not absence, but arrival. The ancient ones had waited in that space, not punished, but paused. The promise was like a breath held in the lungs of history, and now the air shifted. The breath was released. He came, not to offer another sacrifice, but to announce the power of the first, the power of the cross. In many cathedrals, the Holy Saturday liturgy is spoken in whispers. But in the world below, it was not whisper, it was shout. The dead heard a sound they had never known, a voice that carried eternity in it, a light that cast no shadow. Christ did not come weeping, he came blazing. The silence of Saturday was never empty. It was pregnant, like the hush before thunder, like the quiet before birth. It was the moment before everything changed. And in that silence, the Lord of life was walking where only death had reigned. The mystics say what looked like stillness was invasion. The harrowing had begun. The reign of death had met its match. The doors that had held the righteous for centuries were beginning to crack, not with noise, but with authority. Because when Christ speaks, even in silence, eternity listens. Satan held the keys, but not by right. Death was never meant to rule. It entered through sin, through the wound of Eden. And from that moment on, the enemy claimed dominion, not as king, but as usurper. He stood at the gates of Sheol, not in majesty, but in theft, holding what was never his to keep, the souls of the righteous, souls that belonged to God, souls that awaited a redeemer. Satan's power over death was permitted, not ordained. He was the jailer, not the judge. His reign was temporary, a counterfeit throne built on the silence of sin. And that silence was about to be broken, because Christ did not descend to negotiate. He descended to reclaim. The ancient fathers say that Christ confronted the enemy not with argument, but with presence. Like a king walking into a stolen city, not to bargain, but to take back what was his. The darkness knew him. The enemy recognized him. And in that moment, all power shifted, not with swords, but with the full weight of divine authority. Saint Ephraim the Syrian once wrote, "Death met him and turned back. Hell saw him and was afraid." The descent was not a descent into weakness. It was the Lord of hosts stepping into enemy ground, not to be captured, but to capture captivity itself. Imagine the terror in hell, not chaos, but certainty, that everything the enemy thought he owned was now being stripped from his hands. Christ did not come for vengeance, he came for victory. And the souls that had waited began to rise, one by one, name by name, from Adam to the last prophet. The scriptures tell us that the last enemy to be destroyed is death. 1 Corinthians 15:26. But that destruction began the moment Christ stepped into the grave, the moment the author of life walked through the shadow and claimed it as his own. Satan did not surrender willingly, but it didn't matter. The true king had arrived, and nothing in hell could stop him. The gates of darkness shattered, and the prophets stood to see it. In the ancient icons of the church, there is a scene, Christ descending, radiant, standing on the broken doors of the underworld. Beneath him, the locks and hinges lie shattered. Around him, Adam and Eve rise, pulled not by their own strength, but by his hands gripping their wrists. He doesn't offer a handshake. He pulls them up, as if to say, "You could not rise, so I came down to raise you." This is not imagination. It is theology in image. The saints of old saw it. The mystics felt it. They knew that Christ's descent was not a side story. It was the first tremor of resurrection. A resurrection that reached not only the tomb in Jerusalem, but the depths of every buried soul in history. Imagine Abraham seeing the promise face to face. Imagine Moses, who died before entering the promised land, now walking into eternity led by the true Passover lamb. Picture David, whose psalms longed for a day of deliverance, now singing before the deliverer himself. Their eyes, weary from waiting, now lit with glory. This was no silent liberation. It was a cosmic uprising. Hell's silence was pierced by the roar of divine justice. The old bonds snapped, not with violence, but with holiness, not with fire, but with presence. And the enemy, once proud, watched his fortress collapse, not by war, but by a whisper. It is finished. Where there had been weeping, now there was joy. Where there was despair, now light. Souls once forgotten now rose with the echo of eternity ringing in their ears. And that echo, it has not stopped. The descent was not just for them. It was for us, a promise written not only in creed, but in cosmos, that no darkness is eternal, that every prison has a door, and that Christ himself holds the key. Hell did not fall because it was weak. Hell fell because heaven stepped in. What he did once, he still does now. Christ's descent into the realm of the dead is not just a past event, it is a living mystery, a spiritual reality that echoes through time, entering hearts as it once entered the shadows. The same fire that broke the chains of Sheol still burns, silently, invisibly, wherever the soul cries out for deliverance. The Church teaches that what Christ accomplished in time continues in grace. He still enters locked rooms. He still walks through the walls of fear. He still descends, yes, descends, into the hidden corners of the human soul. Not in drama, but in mercy. Not in spectacle, but in presence. Have you ever felt that? That silent moment when you are not alone in your pain. When light begins to rise, not around you but within you. That's not imagination, that's visitation. The one who conquered death still walks through shadows. The Sheol of the heart is real. Places in us where memory is sealed, where guilt buries truth, where silence feels eternal. And yet, there too he comes. Not as a preacher, not as a prophet, but as Redeemer, as King. With the same voice that called Lazarus from the grave, he calls your name. And where you have laid down in hopelessness, he stands and says, "Rise." This is the mystery of spiritual rescue. That Christ did not simply come to fix us, but to find us. To walk into the most hidden wounds of our lives and say, "This too is mine. This too I have redeemed." And where there was once a tomb, he plants a throne. When the saints speak of healing, they do not speak of escape. They speak of descent, Christ's descent, into their own unhealed histories. St. Ignatius called it the moment of holy visitation. St. Faustina saw him descending in light upon the dying. They were not visions of the past, but signs of the present power of a risen Lord who still goes down before he lifts up. What Christ did in the heart of history, he now does in the history of your heart. There is a Sheol that lives within us, and he descends there too. Not all darkness is beneath the earth. Some lives in the soul, in the hidden places we refuse to enter, in the silence after trauma, in the echo of prayers unanswered, in the guilt we carry like shadows tied to our heels. That is the inner Sheol, and too many dwell there without knowing that Christ is willing to descend even now. The greatest mystery is not that he entered hell once, but that he enters still, into each heart that feels abandoned, into every memory soaked in shame, into the spiritual graves where hope once lived. He does not flinch at the darkness, he enters it. And when he does, the air changes. Have you ever buried a part of yourself, a dream, a moment, a season of closeness with God that now feels lost? That's where he goes, not waiting for your strength, but responding to your silence. That's where the real battle happens, not in the heavens, but in you. St. Paul, writing to the Ephesians, said, "He who descended is the very one who ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things." Ephesians 4:10, all things. Not just churches and prayers, but the ruins in your heart, the dark corners, the locked rooms, the inner tombs. He fills them, not with noise, but with his own presence. And when he comes, it is not to shame. It is to raise, not to remind you of the chains, but to break them. He speaks the same word he once thundered in the grave, "Come forth," and what was buried begins to breathe again. This is not poetry. It is spiritual reality. The interior life of the believer is the new battlefield, and Christ still descends to win it, quietly, sovereignly, again and again. There is no wound he will not touch, no shadow he will not enter, and no soul so lost that his steps cannot reach it. These sacraments are not rituals, they are rescue. When you confess your sins, it is not just cleansing, it is Christ descending again into your soul. When you receive the Eucharist, it is not bread alone, it is the glorified body of the one who shattered the gates of death. When you pray from the pit of despair, you are not speaking into nothing, you are echoing the same cry heard in Sheol, and he answers. The sacraments are not merely symbols, they are portals, openings through which the eternal work of Christ touches time. Each one is a descent of grace into flesh, of light into shadow, of the King into the broken soul. And each one carries with it the fire of that first descent, quiet but absolute. In confession, we don't just tell our sins. We allow him to enter the locked places. He reaches where no therapist, no memory, no willpower can go. He speaks into the silence we've lived with for years and says again, "Rise." It is not punishment. It is resurrection. In the Eucharist, we do not just receive a token of grace. We receive the Christ who already knows the grave, who walked through it and now walks into us. And he brings not only memory, but mission. He enters so that we might rise. He fills us with what no world can give, the life of the one who died and now lives forever. And prayer, oh prayer, it is not always eloquent. Often it is groaning, silence, tears. But those are not weakness. They are the language of the pit, the language Christ understood when he descended. And when you pray like that, he comes, not as concept, but as companion, not with answers, but with presence. The sacraments are Christ's continued descent into human history and into your history. Each time you receive, confess, or cry out, you invite the King of Glory to do again what he did in the depths, to enter, to liberate, to lift, and he still does, not from afar, but from within. Hell was nameless until he spoke. Before Christ descended, the realm of the dead was silence without identity. It was not just absence, it was anonymity. The souls there were not tormented as the damned, but neither were they home. They waited in a place where names faded, where promises seemed forgotten. It was the ache of unfinished stories, the echo of lives paused mid-sentence. But when Christ entered, everything changed. He did not bring only light, he brought recognition. He called them, not as strangers, but as sons and daughters, not as shadows, but as names written in the heart of God. For the first time, Sheol heard its own name, not from the mouths of the dead, but from the voice of life. Have you ever thought about that? That Christ pronounced the divine name, I am, in the deepest pit? And in doing so, he shattered not just locks, but forgetfulness. The deepest pain of hell is not flame, it is isolation. It is the lie that you are unseen, unknown, unloved. And that lie died the moment the Savior spoke. From then on, no soul would be nameless again. No death would be anonymous, no descent without meaning, because the one who entered had seen them all, and he had come to bring them out, not just to life, but to identity. You are mine. This changes how we see our own pain. When you walk through sorrow, when you feel forgotten, when it seems like your soul is slipping into silence, he is there, and he knows your name. He speaks it with the same authority that broke the gates of death. Satan's greatest weapon was not power, it was shame. He made people believe they were lost, unnamed, unworthy. But when Christ descended, he exposed the truth. The enemy never had the final word. And now that word has become flesh even in the grave. And so, the grave lost its voice. Because the name above all names had been spoken there, resurrection didn't begin at the tomb. It began in the depths. Before the stone was rolled away, before Mary heard her name in the garden, before the world saw the risen Christ, something had already shifted. The deepest place in creation had been touched, the darkest realm invaded. And it was there, in the silence of death, that resurrection first bloomed. We often think resurrection begins in glory, in light, in mourning, in the empty grave. But no, it begins in the dark. It begins where hope is least expected, in the place where no one thought God would come. And that is where he chose to begin again, in the forgotten spaces. That is why your resurrection might not start in celebration. It might start in silence, in struggle, in a place where you feel buried, because that's where he goes. The God who descended into death does not wait for you to climb. He meets you at the bottom. This is the sacred reversal. The cross was not failure, it was victory. The grave was not an end, it was the door. And the descent was not delay, it was triumph. Christ reigns not because he escaped death, but because he conquered it from within. And now, he does the same in us. If you feel like you've fallen too far, like your faith is too faint, like your spirit has grown cold, remember this: he has already walked into deeper places, and he is not afraid of yours. In fact, your lowest point may be the exact place where your resurrection begins. The saints knew it, the mystics lived it, that the spiritual life is not always ascent, it is descent followed by grace. And the one who descended into hell is the same who ascended to the throne and now fills all things, even your shadows. So if your soul is weary, if your silence is heavy, do not be afraid. He is already there, not waiting at the top, but standing in your depths, ready to lift. Not because you earned it, but because he chose it. The resurrection begins where you thought it ended, and from that place, everything changes. If your soul has been stirred by this truth, comment below, "He rose from the depths for me." Let that be your witness and a light for someone else searching in silence. Like, share, and subscribe to Bible Stories and Mysteries, where forgotten truths of faith are revealed, not explained. May the Christ who descended into death walk now into your heart. And may you recognize him even in the silence.